Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's CECAN webinar. My name's Adam Heinovich, and I'm a research associate at the University of Newcastle, where I work on a GCRF hub project called Living Deltas, but I'm also a member of CECAN, and it's my pleasure to be facilitating today's webinar. For those that are not familiar with CECAN or have attended a previous webinar event, CECAN stands for the Centre for the Evaluation of Complexity Across the Nexus, which has been transforming the practice of policy evaluation across food, energy, water, and environmental domains to make it fit for a complex world. And we've achieved this through pioneering, testing, and promoting innovative policy evaluation approaches with UK government departments. And you can find more about that on our website at cecan.ac.uk. So today's webinar, The Practice of Blue Marble Evaluation, is about how we navigate our way through and around the Anthropocene and the local to global scale system-wide changes that are happening and emerging all around us, and how through new approaches to thinking about policy and evaluation, we can enable the transformative change required to move towards more just, equitable, and regenerative futures. So no small task, but a really crucial topic for us to be addressing. And today we have two great thinkers and practitioners that are going to shed some light on how we may start to achieve that necessary transformative change. And so it's my great pleasure to welcome both Michael Quinn Patton and Glenn Page. As many of you know, Michael Quinn Patton is the founder and CEO of Utilization Focused Evaluation, an independent organizational development and program evaluation organization. Michael is an internationally renowned figure in the evaluation community, having received numerous accolades and authored pioneering books on evaluation practice, such as Blue Marble Evaluation, Principle Focused Evaluation, Facilitating Evaluation, Developmental Evaluation, and Utilization Focused Evaluation. Glenn is the president and CEO of SustainaMetrix in Portland, Maine, where he and a global network are navigating the Anthropocene. Glenn has recently launched a global network called COBALT, the Collaborative for Bioregional Action Learning and Transformation, that brings innovation and systems thinking to complex, messy, cross-scale, wicked challenges of our time. And Glenn comes to Blue Marble evaluation from a coastal and restoration ecologist background. And further bios can be found on the CECAN events page. So just before we get into the webinar proper, just a few processes and housekeeping information. So each of our presenters will speak for roughly 20 minutes or so, and then following their joint presentations, we'll have about 15 minutes for questions. So do please submit your questions using the Q&A function, which is on the Zoom controls panel on the screen at the bottom there, throughout the presentations, and then we'll try and get through as many of those as we can. We'll finish at 5 sharp, so I guess if there are some questions left unanswered, then it's possible to follow up with Michael or Glenn separately. The session will be recorded and will be made available later on the CECAN website along with the presenters' slides. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to welcome Michael, who's going to kick us off. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Adam. Greetings, everyone. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk with you about these issues and to share the Blue Marble evaluation perspective with my good colleague and friend, Glenn, and to move you into this space from your busy world and lives. Going to begin with a bit of a meditation on Blue Marble evaluation and the blue marble itself, which is what was named of this iconic shot of the Earth from space in December of 1972, the last Apollo mission. I want to give you just a moment to take in images of hopefully that helps you enter into this space and the challenge ahead of us, being the first generation to know that we are destroying the planet and the last generation that can do anything about it. And so Blue Marble evaluation especially focuses on global problems that transcend national and agency boundaries. These are well known to you: climate change, economic turbulence, more refugees than at any time since World War II, and increasing virulent infectious diseases, including a pandemic, but not limited to it, dying oceans, global cyber terrorism, international drug cartels, human trafficking, weapons trafficking, global poverty and inequality, multinational corporate collusion, food systems that leave 1 in 9 people in the world hungry. None of these problems are immediately solvable. The definitions are disputed. The facts are a matter of intense debate. Politics and special interests dominate. National interests, multinational corporate interests, agency agendas, competition for resources, and yet the stakes are huge. And as we look then at the Blue Marble perspective on these things, it suggests ways in which we have to engage in approaching them differently than we have projects and products of the past. So the basic message of Blue Marble evaluation is to think globally, act locally and globally, and evaluate the interactions. The Millennium Development Goals from 2000 to 2015 focused on the developing countries, and the focus there was on the primacy of country development. We moved to the SDGs in 2015 with the Agenda 2030, and yet these remain focused on countries, on country level indicators. When we compare the images of the Blue Marble with nation states, what we find are that the national boundaries are the result of war, colonialism, enslavement, exploitation, genocide, oppression, greed, politics, religious persecution, and that the challenge of facing global issues as a shared humanity is the challenge that Martin Luther King Jr. put so well, which is on his monument in Washington, D.C., in marble. Every nation must now develop an overriding loyalty to mankind as a whole in order to preserve the best in their individual societies. And so part of the challenge is overcoming these geographic boundaries, sector boundaries, agency boundaries, program boundaries, to look at the SDGs as complex, dynamic, interconnected systems, to see the interrelationships among them. And so Blue Marble evaluation is helping to change how evaluators approach these things so that we're not part of the problem, but in fact can help support looking at solutions. We say that evaluation grew up in the projects with a project and program mentality, which remains dominant. Traditionally, evaluation over the last 50 years has gotten very good at evaluating projects and programs, goal attainment, implementation, impacts, generating findings, lessons, and recommendations. But we're now needing to take new directions, evaluating mission fulfillment, strategies, innovation, advocacy, policy change, systems change, complex dynamic interventions, community impacts, regional initiatives, networks and collaborations, inclusiveness and diversity, innovation, collective impact, scaling, environmental ecosystem sustainability, and global systems change and transformation. None of these things are projects. And yet what evaluators have been trained to do is to evaluate projects. So we become part of the problem when we take global challenges and put them into the project box. The same thing happens at a design level. And so my own journey from the first edition of utilization focused evaluation to the present on Blue Marble evaluation has been a journey of making evaluation more responsive, more adaptable, more attuned to changing conditions in the world. The first principle of Blue Marble evaluation is global thinking, that global problems like climate change, worldwide pollution, global disparities require global interventions and correspondingly globally oriented and world savvy evaluators. It means applying whole earth, big picture thinking to all aspects of systems change. Einstein famously said, we cannot solve our problems with the same level of thinking that created them. And so to take this holistic perspective in evaluation is to also make it possible to design and collaborate on interventions that look beyond our traditional boundaries. And so Blue Marble evaluation is both about design guidance to design interventions that look beyond traditional boundaries and to therefore evaluate in different ways, to think across silos, transforming interrelationships and interconnections, getting beyond the silos mentally, policy-wise, program-wise, intervention-wise, design-wise. Many of the solutions will require breaking down the walls of specific sectors like forestry, agriculture, energy, transport, health, and working with a variety of stakeholders across landscapes, seascapes, and cities to achieve multiple goals at once. There simply isn't enough time or money to pursue isolated and often contradictory solutions. So Blue Marble evaluation is a set of principles to guide design, implementation, funding, and evaluation, with a special emphasis on looking globally, treating the Anthropocene as context, the challenges that we face, engaging with transformation of systems across boundaries, and the global principle, connecting the local and the global. Again, thinking globally, acting locally and globally, and evaluating the interactions. The term global has emerged as the intersection of global and local, seeing the interactions among these. And Glenn is going to be talking with you about his practice and work that especially emphasizes the global connections. We are emphasizing bringing global principles and knowledge to bear in conjunction with and collaboration with local and indigenous knowledge, zooming out for the big picture and zooming in for what's going on within particular contexts. I'm coming to you from the state of Minnesota, the north central part of the United States, where the last glacier melted during the Ice Age. And Minnesota is covered with lakes and rivers and streams and has as its state motto, the land of 10,000 lakes. And for years, when I would do evaluation training in Minnesota, I would begin by talking with people not about evaluation, but about fishing. 87% of Minnesota residents go fishing at least once a year. We fish year round. We do ice fishing in the dead of winter at 20 degrees below zero. Avid fishers. And so I would say to people, how was the fishing? How many did you catch? What kind did you catch? Where'd you go fishing? Who'd you fish with? Was it a successful day? And then say that everything in evaluation was in fishing. What constitutes a good day? What constitutes success? The number of fish, the kind of fish. Were you fishing for eating? Were you fishing for recreation, catch and release? Was it the relationships of the people you were with? People spend $40,000, $50,000 on equipment and boats to catch something that costs $15 a pound in the supermarket. How are they thinking about the cost benefit ratio? And so fishing became a way to connect with people about the nature of evaluation and evaluative thinking. But in recent years, I've shifted from talking about fishing to evaluating the sustainability of the fishing ecosystem. The state fish is the walleye, a very prized fish, freshwater fish. And with a 1 degree increase in temperature of lakes, the walleye will be threatened. New research is showing that there's a high amount of plastic in Lake Superior, 20% of the world's fresh water, in Mississippi River that runs through the country, the USA. The pollution is increasing from the more severe storms that are coming with climate change. The runoff of manure and pesticides and insecticides from farms. The access to clean water is becoming a disparities issue at the ecosystem level. And so the way in which we have to engage these issues from a global perspective, invasive species. There's mercury in the waters of Minnesota that come from power plants in other parts of the world that are carried through the winds at the high level in the oceans, across the oceans. And so connecting the local with the global, helping people see these interactions is a part of what Blue Marble evaluation is about. Peter Drucker, the great management scholar, said, the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it is to act with yesterday's logic. And we have been in a logic of project thinking for the last 50 years. It's a command and control kind of thinking, that we're in charge, that we can make things happen, plan your work, work your plan. Evaluators judge whether or not plans were implemented and intended goals achieved. But in a world of complexity, we're not in charge. The things are unfolding that we aren't able to control. There's high degree of uncertainty, increasing unpredictability, even within the long-term trends that we're seeing. And so to become more adaptive and responsive, and to be able to really apply systems thinking in a complex perspective requires all of those activities, from needs assessment, situation analysis, design, implementation, management, and evaluation, to approach these things in different ways, to really bring systems thinking with a complexity lens to looking at global, local intersections. This summer, the official journal of the American Evaluation Association, New Directions for Evaluation, came out with a special issue on systems and complexity informed evaluation. Most of the articles in this issue are open access, and it will give you an insight into how the leading edge evaluators are working on these issues as they talk about transformation. Transformation involves theories of transformation. I argue that a theory of transformation is made up of a number of theories of change that incorporates system thinking, complexity theories, Blue Marble, innovation theories, network theories, learning theories, and that it's the combination of multiple theories of change interacting that allows us to generate a theory of transformation. We're seeing in the last year an increased attention in the general public and in the press to systems ways of engaging. Clearly, the coronavirus pandemic has highlighted health systems, not just the virus itself, but the health system worldwide, the vaccination campaigns and the disparities in availability of the vaccines further highlights the health systems. We're talking more and more about health disparities within those systems, both nationally and globally. We face not only a pandemic, but an infodemic of massive misinformation, distorted information, lies, people manipulating data. The social justice movement has begun moving from talking about racial discrimination and discrimination against refugees and xenophobia to talking about systemic racism, systemic forms of injustice. The climate emergency is understood as a systems problem, not just a indicator problem of reducing carbon, but a larger set of interrelated systems. The economic system, the supply chain issues that are going on now, the ways in which some 20 to 30% of the world's population has been thrust back into poverty. That includes food insecurity and food systems. And these various systems, the health system, the social justice system, the climate system, the economic system, the food system, the information system themselves are interrelated and interacting. And so global thinking, Blue Marble evaluation has to look at those interactions. I'm going to close by sharing with you the example of Blue Marble evaluation working within the food systems. Through work I've been doing with the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, an alliance of some 30 philanthropic foundations working on food systems, we've been doing Blue Marble evaluation. And as Ruth Richardson, the executive director, said, transformational change is essential. And Blue Marble evaluation has played a fundamental role in helping us navigate our way through the complexity involved. It enables us to create deep and meaningful interconnections to avoid the trap of limited silver bullet solutions to bring about unintended consequences and ultimately to disrupt the status quo that jeopardizes the future of food. Ruth and I have one of the articles in this new Directions journal on leadership evaluation partnership, infusing systems principles and complexity concepts for a transformational alliance. And that is an open access article that goes more deeply into our practice of blue marble evaluation with the Global Alliance for the Future of Food. Let me close by talking about the Food Systems Summit that occurred 2 weeks ago in New York after more than a year of planning that included dialogues that took place around the world. Anyone, civil society organizations, NGOs, governmental groups, agencies, activists, communities were able to convene dialogues about the future of food systems. And these dialogues were part of engaging people to begin thinking about not just food, but about food systems. And they have generated more than 900 of these dialogues. But the question was, well, who would make sense of them? And so the Blue Marble Evaluation Network took on the task of synthesizing and integrating the food systems dialogues. That synthesis report is open and available at the UN Food Systems Dialogue site. I'm going to give you a quick overview of what emerged from our synthesis of those dialogues. The final report of more than 900 dialogues involving more than 40,000 people around the world was organized around what food systems transformations are needed and envisioned, who should engage in transforming food systems, how should the transformation of the food systems be undertaken, what success factors are keys to transformative results. And the guidance that emerged from this was first the emphasis on transformation, that transformation means major, significant, deep, and broad changes beyond piecemeal reforms, incremental change, and narrowly focused projects and programs. Our current food systems, there is widespread agreement, are deeply dysfunctional and broken. A child dies of hunger, of starvation, every 5 seconds in the world. Every 5 seconds, the World Food Program has documented the widespread increase in hunger and food insecurity as a result of the pandemic. And the solutions need to ensure resilient sustainability, meaning humanity and nature thriving together, making equity a priority. Dialogue participants emphasize contributions to equity as a major priority in reforming systems. Who should be engaged? Treat everyone as a stakeholder. The call is for all hands on deck to value diversity and engage inclusively. An extension of treating everyone as a stakeholder is valuing diversity and engaging inclusively, which are essential to achieving equity. The importance of governments taking responsibility and being accountable, but doing so collaboratively in partnerships with the private sector, with NGOs, and amplifying and empowering historically excluded voices like women, indigenous people, smallholder farmers, and youth. And then how should food systems transformation be undertaken? At the top of the list was applying systems thinking. It is the summit process elevated the transition from thinking about food to food systems from a complexity perspective, making complexity fundamental to engaging with transformation, guaranteeing the right to food, not just treating food as a commodity, but as something that's part of a human rights framework, supporting nature positive solutions, agroecology, regenerative ag, and organic farming, contextualizing and localizing, not just having one size fits all and top down kinds of frames, educating people about food systems, shifting perspective, revising narratives, changing mindsets, innovating and integrating what is already working, doing change, but not throwing out the things that are already working, generating massive financial resources for transformation, aligning and integrating coalitions and solutions, ensuring openness and transparency, a lot of concern about closed systems and secret arrangements, acting with a sense of urgency, and finally, facilitating conflict resolution and negotiating trade-offs, and building global transformation momentum across systems, seeing the interconnections between climate, health, the food systems, the infodemic, and learning and adapting through ongoing evaluation. These 22 guiding themes are interconnected. It's not just a laundry list, and seeing their interrelationships leads to a theory of food systems transformation. That means mobilizing and engaging people, conceptualizing and implementing solutions, achieving enabling results, and food systems impact, with cross-cutting themes of ensuring openness and transparency throughout, acting with urgency, and facilitating conflict resolution and negotiating trade-offs. So we placed these themes into a framework of a theory of transformation that involved treating everyone as a stakeholder, valuing diversity and engaging inclusively, mobilizing governments and partnerships, amplifying and empowering historically excluded voices, and generating massive financial resources. That meant then to use those inputs to apply systems thinking, recognize complexity, guarantee the right to food, support nature positive solutions, contextualize, innovate, integrate, ensure sustainability, and make equity a priority. That leads to education, to learning and adaptation through ongoing evaluation, and aligning and integrating coalitions and solutions to achieve transformed food systems that are equitable, sustainable, and resilient, and mutually reinforcing momentum across food, climate, and health systems toward transformational critical mass and tipping points. That's the work that we're doing in the practice of Blue Marble evaluation. And that's what we aspire to do as we move forward to continue to act with a sense of urgency in bringing together the various players in the world to cooperate and collaborate toward a more just and sustainable world. Let me then turn it to my good colleague and friend Glenn to talk to you about his place-based work.
Incredible, Michael. Thank you so much. And it is really just such an honor. In order to evaluate transformation, we recognized that we needed to transform evaluation. And Michael has been a global leader in this process. And I'd like to also acknowledge the global leadership team of Blue Marble Evaluation comprises members from all continents around the world, including indigenous ways of seeing and thinking. Glenn Page, I'm coming to you from former Wabanaki, ancestral Wabanaki territory and the Gulf of Maine, one of the most rapidly warming systems on the planet in the Northern Atlantic. And what I want to just talk about is, as Michael mentioned, this power of both zooming in and zooming out. And what does that mean, this both global and local? So we begin with a little zooming out and asking the question, well, where else could we go? And as we look out into the system around the world, we see, well, yeah, there's 2 trillion galaxies in the universe. Our galaxy, the Milky Way, holds about 100 to 400 billion stars. So this is actually the context of Blue Marble evaluation, is recognizing that there's a lot of planets and stars out there. Well, of our one star, we have 8 planets orbiting. And of those, only one has a biosphere. That biosphere is roughly about 20 kilometers thick, and it's the only place in the universe that we've identified where there is life. So as we think about the context of Blue Marble evaluation, we need to realize and recognize and appreciate the context of this very, very fragile Earth system. And given the fact that this is the only place we know life exists, what does that mean? What does that mean in terms of the future trajectory of Earth systems? And as Michael mentioned, we're the first generation to recognize what we're doing in terms of moving this planet from a relatively stable interglacial period to what could well be a planetary threshold to hothouse Earth. Well, part of blue marble evaluation is recognizing, is there an adjacent possible? Is there actually something, an alternative path? And we've recognized this as Earth systems stewardship. So part of this act of blue marble evaluation and thinking about it in terms of the context of the Anthropocene, what does this really mean? What does this imply to our behavior? What does it mean in terms of planetary boundaries and social and ecological thresholds? So now let's go from zooming out to zooming in. And as Michael mentioned, this challenge regarding national boundaries, but we're recognizing the power of, yes, appreciating and recognizing and working within and across national boundaries, but really thinking about more of a bioregional approach, recognizing the power of thinking in ecological systems terms and governance across transboundary areas, thinking about ecosystems in new ways, which is really transforming what it means for governance implications into the future. If we are to do Earth system stewardship, we need to transform how we understand and engage with Earth systems governance. So we're calling this seeing with a bioregional macroscope. How do we see together? We're actually quite good as a society to see somewhat reductionistic seeing, to see the silos, the sectors. We're not really good as a society, as a species, in seeing the interconnections, the systems. And CECAN is a illuminating light for the world to help into this seeing. Well, we need to do more of this, and we need to encourage this at the local scale and think of the interconnections across the global scale. This comes from colleagues at the Bioregional Learning Center in South Devon in UK, in Totnes, where I work very closely with teams there. And this is the kind of thing that we can actually see with a bioregional macroscope, working at the edges, seeing the whole systems, paying attention and understanding and engaging with Earth systems, thinking about, well, where are the green shoots for change? How do we actually see and connect and accelerate these transformation systems that are among us? How do we prototype and learn and create those enabling conditions for what it means to actually innovate and collaborate, not just quantitatively looking at how we collaborate, how many meetings, how many engagements, but qualitatively. What is the qualitative relationship of collaboration? This critical importance of establishing baselines, multidimensional reference points from which to measure progress, telling how-to stories. And it's so much about storytelling and this oral need and art and poetry and music to help get this word out and inspire people to act and think differently about Earth systems stewardship. And this challenge around governance, really rethinking not just management, but governance, the decisions of what it means to how we actually guide our behavior in this moving into the Anthropocene. So one of the things we've been doing is working with teams from around the world, bioregional teams, to see into the systems. So here in the Gulf of Maine, as I say, one of the most rapidly warming systems on the planet, we're working with bioregional teams from Boston to Cape Ann, a very, very urban area, as well as where I live here in Casco Bay, and this is the Casco Bay watershed bioregion in Portland, Maine, again, ancestral Wabanaki territory, and ancestral Passamaquoddy homeland. This is right at the border of US and Canada, a very, very rural area with tribal communities from the Passamaquoddy still working towards restoration of the riverine system. There's actually languages, local languages are lost every 2 weeks. We lose another language around the world. So one of the challenges of restoring the watershed is not just about bringing back anadromous fish. These are the people of the pollock, the Passamaquoddy, but it's actually bringing back the cultural relationships and the cultural identity, including language of this people of the place. So as we look at these three areas from Boston to here in Portland, Maine and Casco Bay watershed and the ancestral Passamaquoddy homeland, we can put our macroscope over this and actually see the connectivity on the road system. And we call this a transformations transect. And it's actually an urban to rural transect. And we can see into this patterns of in and out migration. You can see here the population. Here's the patterns of out migration in the rural and in migration in the urban. Levels of poverty, which is actually quite similar in the urban and the rural. The degree of education, the livelihoods linked to the health of the natural system, much, much higher in the rural areas versus the urban areas. So the importance of actually engaging with the restoration of local systems is so critical in the rural, but so much of those goods and services connect to the urban. So it's this interrelationships that's seeing and the synergies on these pathways to what could be called a more just, equitable, regenerative future that Adam mentioned as he opened the show. We're also working in places like Northeast Iceland, in the Northwest Iceland, and the West Fjords with a bioregional team there. In fact, I'll be leading a learning journey next week to that area. Also in Scotland, both in the Clyde bioregion, there's Glasgow that'll be hosting COP26, and we hope to be putting both blue marble evaluation and bioregionalism on the map at COP26, but also on the other side, the Tayside bioregional team. So all this information is available on the web in terms of the Tayside bioregional team, the Clyde bioregional team, in terms of what they've been doing and applying this logic. Also, emerging team in County Mayo, Ireland, working with the county council and actually focusing on what might be possible for blue tech. But also in the global south, working with Costa Rica Regenerativa, looking at a national scale program on a pathway to regeneration for Costa Rica as a whole, and working in the Guanacaste Nicoya Peninsula as an area of focus to pilot blue marble evaluation and create a blue marble baseline from which to measure progress towards regeneration. But also, and I'll close on this, the Amazon Sacred Headwaters, an absolutely globally significant and remarkable effort that's going on. This is not a project. This is really a dream, a vision from people of the place to bring together a bioregional plan over 34 million hectares with a wide range of partners, indigenous communities, and working together with people of the place who are seeing into the system and are asking for blue marble evaluation. They recognize the power of seeing into and measurement and have identified blue marble evaluation as the pathway forward for how they will better see into the system and learn by doing. This is dimensions of the bioregional plan that they've just released, from bioregional planning to diagnostics, but this pathways to ecological transitions and this idea of constant adaptive learning and recognizing that this is not a short-term plan. This is a long-term initiative. There is a sense of the biophysical frame, and this is the Upper Andes. This is the most biodiverse place on Earth with over 30 indigenous nations. And so getting this right, this transformation system that's being envisioned, is absolutely critical. And it's not just about human dimensions. It's also about recognizing, as Minari says here, the earth is our family. She is part of us, and she is our teacher because she is teaching us a way to sow, manage, and live with her. So much of this is rooted in spirituality, in the rights of nature. And so blue marble is actually focusing on those dimensions as well, not just process thinking, outcome thinking, but also issues relating to spirituality and rights of nature. So as Michael mentioned, all of the 4 core overarching principles are woven into this work, absolutely central to global thinking, Anthropocene as context, this critical dimension of transformative engagement, moving consistent with the magnitude, direction, and speed. Also overarching integration, but also 10 what we call principles of the practice, time being of the essence, both urgent, but also moving at the speed of trust. This yin-yang principle, understanding and working with paradoxes that we're surrounded by, seeing those paradoxes and understanding and working with them. Bricolage, matching the methods to the context. This evaluation as intervention and how it can actually be fun and engaging to bring people around the challenge of adaptive learning. The skin in the game, acknowledging your stake in the game of what it means to be part of an Earth system and contribute to Earth system stewardship. The fidelity to, as Michael was describing, this transformation theory. And what does that mean? Alignment towards this and having really good theories of transformation. So this is a long-term sacred journey, and it's absolutely really important that we get the work right in terms of data and sovereignty of data. So issues of intergeneral collective well-being, protection, ethics, indigenous data governance is all so critically important. And then as we think in terms of what we know versus what we don't know, there's a great deal we actually do know, but so much more we don't know. So it's working with colleagues around this. How do we better see into our bioregions and interconnect across spiritual, social, and ecological dimensions? What traditions do we want to continue that support regeneration in bioregional life? What cycles do we want to break? What new systems do we want to initiate now and for generations yet unborn? And what kind of ancestors do we want to be? So as I bring this to the close, there's some colleagues that I just want to mention. Emily Gates, working with her on a case study of this particular Cuencas sagradas, the work in the Amazon, but also folks like Per Olsen, who are really working and moving the ball around understanding phases of transformation using the Giels framework, and very much actively involved with working with us on seeing into the transformation systems. And of course, partners working with how to actually work together, walk together, the eagle and the condor flying together and understanding indigenous ways of seeing and rights of nature. So with that, I simply close by recognizing the critical theories that are out there, and we're guided by principles focusing on practice rooted in this idea of blue marble evaluation. So with that, I'll hand it over to the facilitators. Adam?
Thanks, Glenn, and thanks, Michael, both for inspiring talks there. Very, very thinking about the big picture and moving us from a place of thinking narrowly to thinking much more systems-wide and holistic in how we approach these issues. That was really fantastic. So as the questions, I hope, start to roll in, we have one here from June Holly. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And I guess this is to both of you. She says, can you say more about evidence-based transformative evaluation? So what evidence do we have that that actually transformation using evaluation is actually occurring, and how do we evidence that? Whether Michael wants to pick that up.
From my perspective, evidence-based and evaluation is redundant. Evaluation is evidence-based. That's what it means to evaluate, is to bring evidence to bear on what is happening. The language of evidence-based has become political. It is a way of people making claims about things that they often don't have very much evidence for. And so evidence is a big basket that includes lots of different kinds of methods and indicators. We describe the blue marble evaluation methods as bricolage, as using all kinds of methods, all kinds of indicators, using whatever is available. Bricolage is a French term for the person who's able to make something out of whatever's at hand, drawing on whatever is available to make sense of it. And so the being evidence-based and evaluation is situational. It's what's appropriate given the ways in which things are going. And a good example, obviously, of evidence was the most recent intergovernmental report on climate that just came out a month ago that shows that we're going the wrong direction on all the indicators. That's major evidence. The evidence on food systems, much of what the summit, food system summit involved was evidence about the ways in which people are going hungry, that food systems are not supplying needs, the challenges both on one hand of starvation and of obesity on the other hand. So there's no shortage of evidence. It turns out that the challenge, in my perspective, is not evidence, it's interpreting the evidence, it's acting on the evidence. There's plenty of evidence. The challenge is people not interpreting, not paying attention to, not dealing with the evidence, and not acting on the evidence.
And the only thing I'll add to that beautiful response, and June, thank you for the question, is also what we actually mean by evidence. For example, the work, the IPCC report that Michael just mentioned, really emphasized this idea of we really need to reconsider our own inner dimensions. And if we're actually thinking about transformation, what do the inner dimensions mean? So what's the evidence as we look inward, not just outward? So let's think about those domains of scale, but also the issues and evidence around things that may not be really evidence-based. This idea of spirituality, and essentially the work in the Amazon was inspired by a dream. And the evidence by that was someone said, I had this dream, which is exactly what Martin Luther King said. And this dream has inspired, and the evidence is from the inspiration. And it's that interpreting that inspiration of what that means. And then also thinking about the evidence of rights of nature. We have plenty of evidence of evolution. And we also have plenty of evidence of biodiversity loss and extinction. We have recent evidence of the woodpecker, the ivory-billed woodpecker. We just lost that, completely lost that species. And what does that then mean? What does that do? What does the evidence of that do to inspire change? So those are some things to consider in terms of the interpretation as well.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks, Michael, for that. We've got another question here from Heather Smith-Fowler, who asks, when the issues and practical challenges are so large, complex, and wicked, how do you keep yourself and others optimistic, engaged, and forward-thinking?
Well, those are different things. I appreciate the question. I'm not optimistic. It's not the job of evaluators to be optimistic or pessimistic. It's our job to look at the data and the things that are going well and the things that aren't going well, and to help people interpret them. But what keeps me engaged, I appreciate that, and forward-looking, is the new generation. My daughter has come into evaluation. She came to me a few years ago and said, Dad, I think I want to become an evaluator. We now have some 10 that we know about, second generation evaluators. I've been privileged, as Adam said, to receive a number of evaluation awards, but the greatest honor I've had is to have my daughter decide to become into the business and want to carry this on. And she's deeply committed to issues of social justice and sustainability, and came to see evaluation as a way to contribute to that. That evaluation had become a barrier to it. And as she followed my work and got engaged with it, that the opportunities to help people use evaluation to make adjustments, to adapt, to look at the evidence, to take action, gave us a sense of that. There's a network called Eval Youth, of young and emergent evaluators, that's over 25,000 strong. The young people who are carrying out these movements and are engaged about their own future, they want to make a difference, and they need evaluation to help them do that. Our young evaluators and emergent evaluators are very committed to these issues, and that's what keeps me going forward looking. My children, my grandchildren, and all of our great-grandchildren.
And the only thing I'll add to that beautiful reflection, Heather, these are great questions. And this is really a question for, I think, everyone on the planet, both now and into the future. We are navigating into terra incognita. And so asking this question among ourselves, our communities, how are we keeping each other going? is a really, really good question. That's a good evaluative question, and it's a blue marble question. People like Jane Goodall are speaking directly to hope. And what does that mean? And she writes eloquently about that in her most recent book, and says that it's essential. It's a human cognitive evolutionary trait that we have to have hope in some way or another. Rebecca Solnit writes eloquently that hope's not just sitting on a couch somewhere and hoping something changes, but breaking down the door and moving into something and actually putting all your effort into it. And the other piece I'll mention is I was recently with several of these indigenous leaders in the Amazon and in the Rio Pastaza, working with applying this blue marble thinking in this work of the Cuencas Sagradas. I was so absolutely impressed with both the challenges they're facing and the humor that is absolutely ever present in just about every conversation. It is this joie de vivre, this joy of life, that is so critically important, and yet they face some of the most challenging, daunting issues that I've ever seen, and yet humor has guided them. So how do we learn from each other, and how do we bring that further forward, and how do we ask these questions and just sort of create communities of support? So wonderful, wonderful question.
Thanks both for those really insightful answers. So the third question here is from Jonas Schonfeld, and he's basically, if I sort of paraphrase his question a little bit, it's quite long, but it's great to see that evaluation is starting to grapple with these issues, but why has it taken so long to evaluation to do so? And then how can you spread that thinking into regional and national evaluation associations?
It's a great question. I've been involved with evaluation from the beginning. When we dated back to the mid-70s, when the first major handbook on evaluation appeared, the American, Australasian, Canadian evaluation societies were formed. And in the early days, evaluation was what we call a back-end activity. We thought that our job was going to be to determine whether programs were achieving their goals, whether they were appropriately implemented. But as we began doing that work, it became clear that a lot of programs didn't have goals. In fact, they didn't have programs. And evaluation moved from being a back-end activity to more of a front-end activity, helping articulate with people what their goals were, what the program was, and it got us into the design business gradually, but still largely narrowly focused upon linear logic models, linear thinking, and that was a reflection of how programs were designed, how they were funded, and how they were commissioned. But over time, as we got more involved in the front-end activities, beginning in 2002 was the first major conference in the American Evaluation Association that actually had systems thinking as a conference theme. The first evaluation book on systems came out in 2005 and from Bob Williams and Imaki Raj. The work from there began increasingly to have a small group of people reconceptualizing the front end work as we were looking at more complex kinds of issues. And what's happened recently then is that evaluation has moved from back end to front end to a more prescriptive perspective on what that front end should look like. The American Evaluation Association, the Canadians, the Europeans have all adopted commitments to equity as a part of what evaluation ought to be doing. It means that every evaluation should address how a program is dealing with issues of inclusiveness, equity, and diversity. And in Prague in October of 2019, the last face-to-face conference before the pandemic, the International Development Evaluation Association adopted a manifesto, which you can find online there, that all evaluation should address sustainability. And so as a profession, we've come to it late. We have adopted these dual commitments to make the criteria, evaluation is all about criteria, to make the criteria of intervention effectiveness to include that they address issues of equity and sustainability. And that professional commitment then is how we get this back down into local and national associations and into evaluations commissioned anywhere in the world. What I tell students is, this is no longer a matter of personal values. I don't go to people and say, I, Michael Patton, think that sustainability and equity are important and you ought to address it in your programs and your evaluation. As a worldwide profession of some 75,000 professionals around the world, with our professional associations, we have made an explicit commitment that the profession, given the climate emergency, given the Anthropocene, given the challenges that we face, that we all together have a responsibility to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And that means making criteria of equity and sustainability universal in whatever kind of activity is going on at whatever level. That's what an emergency means. You step up, all hands on deck. So we've come to it late, and not everybody's there. There's still a lot of business as usual, including the traditional criteria that are being used by many commissioners. But we're on the pathway now to recognizing that we have to change our criteria and our actions to make a more just and sustainable world.
Great. Glenn, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Well, just beautifully said, Michael. I mean, really, really beautifully said. And I'll just share a perspective. I cut my teeth as a restoration ecologist. So I spent years understanding natural systems and how do we actually evaluate, what's the criteria? And that's such a key point, this criteria that we look at functional equivalency. And it was in that process and the work that I did in public engagement and the process of habitat restoration, I realized that people weren't just coming to this work because they were participating in helping to restore ecosystems. They were actually helping to restore themselves and the issues of trauma, et cetera. So I was seeing engagement and the practice, my practice of restoration ecology in a whole new light. And that's what actually led me into this field of evaluation. And quite honestly, I wasn't all that inspired at what I was seeing, but then I connected with a few folks such as Michael, who were actually integrating ecosystem principles. I remember, I'll never forget attending a workshop that he was illustrating the use of the Hollings adaptive cycle. This is sort of core to ecosystem thinking. And he was applying it to developmental evaluation. I thought, aha, fellow traveler. And so from there, it really came. But we need to be bridge builders. There is so much evaluation work that's happening in all sorts of other domains. And many people have absolutely no idea the evaluation field even exists. We were talking to folks in big finance who work with large assets, the large asset owners. And these are people who have serious influence on the direction of systems. And they're very much focused on quantitative measures and traditional measures. And they were so thrilled to hear that there is this field of evaluation and this emergence of blue marble evaluation that can actually help them bring in values and ethics around global Earth systems thinking with evaluative rigor that can be applied to financial systems. So we have a lot of work to do to continue to build the bridges across these fields, but it's the celebration of evaluative rigor that I think is emerging beautifully in the field of evaluation.
Thanks very much, Glenn, for that. I think we're in the sort of final throes now, the final minute or so, or a bit less. So I know there are a couple more questions in the chat, but I think maybe Glenn and Michael, perhaps separately, you could follow up with Martin and Narendra on their questions, because we don't really have time to address them now. So what I want to do, though, is I do want to thank both Michael and Glenn for a really fascinating and thought-provoking webinar. It's been really interesting and quite a difference to what we might normally talk about in terms of evaluation and practice and so on. So I think this has been really super fascinating. I'm so honored to be able to chair this webinar, and I'm grateful for both of your contributions. So I think with that we could probably end, but I want to just thank you both very much for your contribution. It's been wonderful.
Well, thank you, Adam, and thank you, Gail. and all of CECAN. You're doing amazing work.
Thanks very much, and hope to see you soon.